Hello, everybody. It's Graham Coath with another My Music in a minute. I'm going to be speaking to someone who could, if they were born in a slightly different generation, have been part of the Eurythmics, I feel. I'll talk to them about that after this. Rookes, thanks for joining me. How are you?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm up a bit earlier than usual, so I'm a little bit slow, but I'm sure I'll pick up.
You'll be absolutely fine. We'll bring up the pace slowly but surely. It's like introducing the rhythm as we go along.
Thank you for the consideration.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, I hope you didn't mind me making that kind of comparison right at the beginning there, but I was watching Dave Stewart from the Eurythmics talking online the other day about how he wrote this piece of music, and he was introducing it by the drum pattern and then the bass line, the synth bass line, etc. And then I got to listen to your music, and I was thinking, wow, there are some comparisons there, right? And then you get to listen to your vocals as well, and I'm thinking Annie Lennox would definitely see you as a bit of a love child, really. So, I mean, are the Eurythmics any kind of inspiration to you at all?
Yeah, absolutely. You're bang on. The Eurythmics very heavily influenced my sense of development of pop music, both of them in their own specific ways. I mean, Annie Lennox's voice has been in my life for all of my life. So my parents were both fans, and but also as I got a little older, I started encountering Dave Stewart's production, not just for the Eurythmics, but also for Alicia's Attic specifically. And I found it quite mind-blowing. There was kind of some resonance there that just never left, and has crept its way into most of what I make. And, I think that's the same with a lot of people who produce music. You're a sponge for what's around you. Generally, as humans, we are, but your initial influences are going to always be a bedrock of your work. So there's a lot of the Eurythmics. There's a lot of Peter Gabriel. There's a lot of Joni Mitchell in bits that I do, and especially my earlier folk stuff. There's who else is there? Bob Dylan a little bit. There's a lot of the Beatles. All this stuff that I was soaking in my parents' house while I was growing up.
Oh, fantastic! I mean, Peter Gabriel is always an interesting one. As you know, Peter Gabriel tends to build up from a rhythm. Do you tend to build up from a rhythm? Do you tend to think about sort of drums first, etc.?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. My father's a percussionist and had been for many years before I was born, and so rhythm is really important to me. Often drums and bass are the first thing that I layer in to a track, unless I'm working specifically with an artist that has a lead instrument. Usually if I'm starting with a project in music software, that's where it begins.
Do you hear, because this is the interesting thing for people listening that perhaps aren't, technically minded or musically minded even, but love listening to it. Do you hear the whole of that drum track first? I once worked with a drummer who could literally go into the studio and lay down the whole drum track, and he'd be counting in his head all the time as he was drumming. and come out, and then he knew exactly where to put everything over the top of that, because he'd literally counted it all out and remembered it by a set of numbers. Do you hear the whole thing, or do you build it up bit by bit and just go, that needs to follow that? Which way does it work for you?
Unfortunately, I don't have that particular skill set of being able to hear the complete thing. I do have synesthesia, which allows me to see the music, which is a very specific experience, I gather. Of course, until you identify these things, you think everyone thinks like you do. So I didn't quite understand why people couldn't see what I saw. So it's kind of like, for me, filling a canvas with color or with form. And so you start off with what you can hear, or in my case, see, and then you fill in the gaps. And you're kind of looking at tone and shade and, you know, sometimes texture, and these sorts of descriptors overlap in both visual and hearing, and, you know, a lot of other kind of sense formats for creativity. So I usually start with what I can kind of see or feel in that space, and then just add things. And it's almost like the image or the track is revealed to me as I move forward. I'm very used to the discipline of stepping into the dark and finding the stepping stone in front of you. And I think that's a skill that people are more afraid of than they should be, where creativity is concerned, especially in the broader music marketplace, or the industry as we kind of call it. That specific skill of trusting the music or trusting your instincts it has slowly kind of become a rarer thing in terms of making music in the face of profits and investors.
Two of the people we've mentioned so far, Dave Stewart and Peter Gabriel, you would almost say are kind of like they're almost kind of like confident introverts, and in terms of making music, especially producing music as well, there's an element of it which requires you to kind of just spend hours by yourself, just honing and learning stuff and developing stuff so that you can then produce it for other people. How, especially with the kind of modern pop world where it's partly online and everything's social, and then, you know, the actual making of it, to be able to do that, you've got to come within yourself quite a bit as well. How do you find the balance between the two?
I think it's a constant renegotiation process, because you don't just grow in your skills, you grow in your personhood as you move along, as you evolve as a music maker. I'm someone who is very introverted, and I do recharge alone. People mistake me for an extrovert because I have excellent communication skills, and I'd love it if I did draw energy from people. In fact, it would make some facets of my job a lot easier, but I don't. I very much am a little kind of musical entity. Like, if I look that you can just kind of set spinning and I will just happily stay there just making stuff. And that comes with pros and cons, because we all need people. Even introverts need people. So to stay kind of connected, I have certain disciplines to get me out of my cement box, because the kind of, like I said, the making part and the being alone part, that is all just too easy for me. The tricky bit is getting out there and connecting, and I can do it. And like I said, I have strategies to do it. I have to do it in order to meet artists. I utilize social media as a jumping off point to make those connections often. Like, a lot of my potential client conversations come in through social media, and that's because I've got the skills to present myself well in that space. And that's a learned behavior. That's a set of skills that I've accrued over about 7 years altogether. And I'm glad that I have, because obviously it has enabled me to run my business and run my studio and have a growing roster and to make connections. But I just have to plan recharge time and time alone in the studio and time to develop things. Otherwise, I get very easily overwhelmed by all the energy that I'm having to give to other people, and I burn out. And I think a lot of creative people who are introverted burn out easily. I think burnout in general is a problem in the industry, but if we're not paying attention to our needs and to our body and to our brain, then we don't have any energy to make the things. So it's counterproductive to ignore those things. And I think also from a creative standpoint, something that I learned a long time ago is your idea isn't necessarily the best one in the room. You can churn out a lot of creativity, but sometimes the magic is in the connection with other people. And as a producer, I can understand and appreciate that a lot more now that I'm a few years deep into this journey. And I really like the fact that I sometimes come into the studio with a new person and I don't know what's going to happen, and I can steer that process and I can facilitate that space. And I love holding space for artists. It's a real joy and a real privilege to invite people in, to make them feel safe, to explore whatever project it is that they want to make, and to help them to manifest it, but also for that to be a collaborative process. And it becomes then a little thing that I snaffled from comedy writers' rooms, which is the best idea wins.
Yes.
And that's how the best records get made, really, is often not, I mean, some records are just made with pure artist vision. I think Bon Iver is a really good example of that, of just driving in a direction with full commitment to the vision. But he's an artist producer, and a lot of artists come to me because they're conscious that they would like to evolve something. I'm not the kind of producer that tends to work much with artists who just use producers as their hands because they can't be bothered to learn skills. They tend to fall out of love with me very quickly when they realize that I am about being a team and about let's evolve something. And I can have a lot of respect for the material that they bring. And I'm actually about to start a record with an artist who's brought very developed demos, and they are spectacular. And I can see where the gaps are. Like, that's where the visual thing comes in. I'm like, okay, if we're going to polish it and move it in this direction, let's consider, number one, what you want to achieve with the record, and allow that to influence the way that we evolve it so that we can optimize what we're making for your goals and things like that. So then it doesn't just become a throwing crap at the wall process and seeing what sticks. It becomes a much more purposeful, much more joyful journey.
Yeah, really resonated with me, by the way, when you were saying about the best idea in the room wins, because in my day-to-day, I create content with people, and I've created content with music artists as well, in terms of social media content. And actually within those processes, I really don't mind, but it takes time to get to that point. I really don't mind if I bring an idea and they go no, because ultimately what you do find is that the push and pull between you comes up with the best idea. And that's so often the case, isn't it? That actually it's just about sometimes showing somebody a completely diverse idea, which then allows them to really understand exactly where they do want to go. And that in itself is fine.
Yeah, I mean, this is why references are so important. I mean, this is something that comes up usually in the first planning session that I have with an artist when we've agreed to make a record together and we signed our contracts and things, is we sit down and we make the reference list. We create the playlist and we will discuss them in detail, and what about them is the thing that the artist wants to draw out. We want them to be innovating. just a quick example from an artist that I've been working with lately. They were very interested in Sam Ryder and the guitar tones that are used specifically in 17 Going Down and a bunch of associated tracks. So that was the tone that we aimed to emulate in the music that we were developing. And also it was nice because I was then able to introduce her to some of Sam Ryder's influences that she had never come across before, like Frightened Rabbit.
Oh.
So that was, and a lot of it is to do as well with going through the playlist, identifying the main influences for this artist, but then finding the influences that influence their influences. That's a big thing for me. One of my favorites was when I was doing a co-write with a young dance artist who is maybe 21, and she was pulling up these TikTok references that I hadn't come across yet. So every day is a school day. So I sat down and I said, okay, can you show me some links? And we had a little listen, and I said, okay, this is Massive Attack.
Right.
Or this is Faithless. And she didn't know who Faithless was. And now for me, of course, as someone who is a little older and came up, kind of was a child coming into teens in the 90s, the idea of someone not knowing who Faithless is bonkers. But realistically, people aren't exposed to those influences. Yeah. And I think sometimes as well, people don't always, like younger people don't always have the enthusiasm for things that they perceive to be in the cultural ether. So they don't necessarily go looking for where that comes from. If they perceive the sound to be in some way dated. And I think it's a mistake, because we are products of an evolutionary process where music is concerned, and we are going to be magpieing from stuff all way back, all the way back to jazz. But if we don't understand how that works, then that will curtail our ability to evolve again. So I really enjoy introducing artists to the influences of their influences. I find it a very satisfying process.
I enjoy it, even doing the show. I mean, I get to talk to artists, and quite often we've left where they've given me an artist I've never heard of, and I give them an artist that they've never heard of. Or, we talk about a record where they go, oh, you know what? You're not the first person that's told me I should listen to that. And now you're telling me, so I will go and listen to it. And then we have a conversation off air afterwards about just how amazing that is, and just how maybe they've absorbed something from it culturally, but even haven't realized they've absorbed something from it culturally. It's an interesting one you say about young people and how they interact with music because of the way it's kind of disseminated and distributed now, and having 5 children of different ages, from 22 all the way down to 8. I can assure you that actually, I think there's one of the things I've learned is you have to let young people sometimes find their own path into that as well, because it is the case these days that there's almost a lack of want to create those associations at a young age that perhaps we had. I mean, but that's because we physically stood outside record stores waiting for them to open to go and physically buy something and be part of something. Yeah. And we would actually see physically your music move up the charts. These days, that doesn't happen. So
yeah, I think the closest thing we have is when independent artists rally their audiences to help them to make moves in the industry. So
I love that.
Yeah, like a good example of that is a kind of a very lovely person I know on the independent music scene is it's Laura, who used to be known as She Makes War, was later Pen Friend and a part of the team We Obey Robots. Laura is an absolute master at mobilizing her fan base to achieve her career goals, and I have endless respect for that in this current musical climate, because that's ultimately just kind of, what's the word? It's like not reappropriating. It's like recreating what used to happen and what can still happen, and the power of the fan base, and an ongoing respect for the work that it takes to build the fan base, which is something that in the digital age we're losing sight of fairly rapidly. And I keep kind of pointing my artists in that direction, but there's this very strong conflict that's taking place around the impact of social media on the development of the music industry and the opportunities that are available. I actually saw a video on the way here. A pal of mine, Bishi, who's also a stunning artist and composer, posted it, and I reposted it, which was a chap talking about an artist, I think. I didn't get to check, but someone talking about his friend who works for one of the majors, and the fact that they are not interested in signing anyone who hasn't blown up on the internet. And that's not a surprise, because from my perspective, the majors are profit-making machines. They're not really kind of interested in developing artists outside of that goal. So from a metrics perspective, if you're driven by metrics in terms of your goals, and this is obviously huge capitalism impact, then that's going to inform your choices. And because we are now in a society with a shorter attention span than ever, perceptively, in terms of if you see music as something that's to be consumed rather than to be enjoyed, or that there's a relationship to be had there, which is primarily how it's perceived when you hit that level, then yeah, they're going to go for what's going to get them the most streams, because they're the ones that are profiting from the streaming services in a way that artists are not. And so, well, artists that are not, their top artists are not. So but obviously for artists, there's this sense of, you know, they want access to the funds and opportunities that these labels can provide. And they're often exhausted, because being an artist is incredibly exhausting. There's a hell of a lot to do. And if they don't feel like they have the tools or the inclination to acquire them, then they feel stuck. But I think that's almost where independent labels, in my perspective, need to pivot to bridge that gap in order to find better business models to facilitate artist growth and development and building relationships with audiences, so that everyone who is a part of a team around a record or an artist or, you know, a tour can benefit from that scenario without it having to fall into a purely metrics game, which is quite soul destroying over time.
It is soul destroying, and that metrics game goes all the way down the chain as well. I mean, I started this podcast 3.5 years ago, and I've been very, very fortunate, partly because I had feet in, you know, or history in music myself, and actually knew some people within the industry. But as I've gone on, I've come up against brick wall after brick wall with some people, and it's often not the artists themselves that you come up against a brick wall. It's management or the record label who will go, "You're not doing that interview," right?
Really?
Even if the artist wants to do the interview, it will be the management that will say, "No, you're not doing that interview."
Do you know what the motivation is?
And the motivation will be purely metrics. It will be, we only want to put this artist into interview situations where, or with people that have got a certain amount of viewing figures or certain metrics, right? Nothing to do with the conversation. And yet I've had so many people come on here and go, "Do you know what? That was incredibly refreshing. I've actually had a decent conversation for once, because actually I've done this and this and this." And every time I've done it, it's been the most stupid questions, got absolutely nothing to do with the music, etc. But my management stroke record company insists that I do it because there's the views, you know. And people can change that, though. People can change that.
Agreed. And I think also it's a very closed-minded position, because, and also it doesn't necessarily reveal a lot of knowledge about how internet discovery works. Like, even people who manage to create trending content, anyone who works in social media and marketing will quietly tell you no one really knows what they're doing. Everyone is just trying to throw content on the internet and see, and we don't know necessarily what people are going to respond to, because human beings are not algorithms. They can, algorithms can play a part in influencing the way that human beings move, but they will always be spontaneous and sporadic. And I think we have to be less afraid to engage with different ideas and with kind of smaller businesses and things like that, because you don't know what's going to come from a conversation, and you don't know who's going to discover you. It's impossible to predict that kind of thing. You can take a good swing at it if you like, but a lot of what has motivated me in terms of the connections or the collaborations or the clients that I've ended up working with or the colleagues that I've accrued along the way has been whether I get a good feeling or whether I have strong intuition or whether I feel safe with that person. And someone being interesting and talented and kind for me is like the apex of awesome. And I would rather invest my time in that, because when I pursue those connections, they lead to good things. And so much of how I build my business, both kind of as a producer and as a person, is invested in quality of experience above anything else, because ultimately money is important. And in this society, it's stupid to say that it isn't, especially in this economy.
Yeah, money, of course, is important, isn't it? But ultimately,
but it's not everything.
No, and I was just having a conversation today with somebody this morning about, in a way, the kind of displacement of the value of intellect, right? Which we used to see. You used to say, oh, this person's intelligent, or this person, this person has particular intellect in this or whatever. Even things like, academic ability in this particular area. Actually, I think the world is shifting, and I do think that there's a lot of people now who are beginning to place value on values, and I think that's ultimately the best transaction out there. If you actually share the same values and the same ultimate goals, really, that's the best transaction.
Totally. Right. And naturally, in terms of, if you ever study anything to do with sociology and anthropology, and kind of you start examining the way that human beings work, the pendulum always shifts. When there has been something that's been at the extreme end of something, like society does start dragging it in the other direction. And we've seen that in a lot of things. In politics, it's as predictable as hell. But in music as well. And I think something that has happened is the reintroduction of authenticity and how that manifests itself, both in music and marketing, and the two intersecting with each other. And I mean, this is something that, like I said, heavily informs what I do. I mean, even just yesterday, I had a co-write with an artist who said, I've never felt so comfortable in a producer's studio before. And that's to do with, it is brilliant. That's exactly what I want. That's the kind of experience that drives me. It's not always to do with the output, although the output is important. Like we want to make music. We want it to be good. Yeah, exactly. But even if the music still needs work, but that artist had a very positive experience, they're going to come back. Like, this is how you also return. From a business perspective, this is how you create a returning client base. You want them to feel satisfied with the product, but you also want them to feel satisfied with the experience, because as the old adage goes, it's not always what you say to people, it's how you make them feel. If you are going to make them feel heard and creative and safe, and like they can enjoy music making and it can be a joyful experience for them, because frankly, I always say it's like pulling magic out your butt and calling it work. Like, it's really very wonderful. It's a nice job to have, and there's a reason we all try to make it work and try to build business and try to get into this industry, and it's that.
But I was going to say, and also when it's something creative, there's an element to it by which, you know, you want them leaving feeling entirely satisfied with it at that moment in time. However, you also want there to be the drive there that actually what you produced at that moment in time isn't it.
Yeah.
Right? That there's more still to come.
Yeah. There's always
almost
more.
Sounds like it almost sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? Which is that, you know, this is the best. And how many times have you heard an artist say, "This is our best album," and then the next album it's, "This is our best album."
This is our best album. Yeah.
This is our best album. But that quite often is, because it's all part of a journey.
Yeah, I mean, really making, like, any kind of creativity, any music making is a snapshot of the maker at that time. So it's always going to be the best with the tools that you've got, hopefully, you know. But that's not to say that you're going to evolve again and the next one is going to be better. And I think when artists can sort of accept where they are and approach their making and their musicianship with that sense of, we're going to make this where it is and where you're at, and that's not just to do with skills and abilities, that's also to do with psychology, because when artists come into a studio, they are bringing whatever is happening in their life into the room. And so you have to do some debriefing, and you have to check in, and you have to say, how are you doing? What's going on today? Like, because otherwise it will bleed into the work, whether you want it to or not. That is just how human beings are designed. We make art to process what's happening to us. We make art to process our past experiences, and also to connect with others so that we don't feel isolated in them. So these things are all very relevant to the production and the record making process.
They are indeed. Listen, final kind of question, which is, do people come to you? Do you go to people? Which happens the most?
I'm very pleased to say that these days people tend to come to me, which is very, very gratifying. And I've done a lot of activism as well, which I haven't really touched on it a lot here, but that's okay. I founded a network with Katie Tavini, who's a mastering engineer, called 2% Rising, which is a digital space for women, non-binary and trans people who work specifically in studio production and engineering. And we exist mostly on Facebook, but we have plans to move off Facebook, and we have done for a while. So we just need to do some actioning on that. And obviously, as time passes, it's going to be more the music. And that's kind of what you want, is like, oh, yeah, I've got some credits now. Look. And so it is evolving. But also, I do a lot of chat on social media about the stuff that we've talked about today, in terms of how and when I structure my business and why. And also the fact that so much of the way that I put my production work together is based on what I've seen in the music industry that doesn't work. And so it's evolving out of that space of not reaction, but like observation and informed decision making. And that, I think, creates a very strong sense of stability for artists who are often in a position where they're being kind of yanked in one direction or another in terms of how they should give their time, energy and resources. So there's a lot of, I'm aware that I project a very safe harbor kind of energy in that music business space. So sometimes artists reach out to me and they just want to have a chat about things, but sometimes they reach out to me and they say, I'm desperate to make a record. I know that you can help me do this. And so, you know, that's how those conversations evolve. I did a big push actually in January on TikTok and on Instagram to get more client conversations rolling with artists. And that was wildly successful. And probably about 45% of those were dialogues that I had already had with artists out in the world. Because sometimes I do live engineering. That's a good symbiotic way to meet artists, because they can see that you immediately know what you're doing from a technical perspective, and they see that you're an approachable person, and that can then involve a conversation. So then they follow me on social media, and then they find this content, and then that provides another touchstone for them to have a conversation. But then, 55% of that discovery of that video and that January kind of push was found just through the algorithm. And part of that is to do with the fact that some people who just know me have just shared that piece of content. Sometimes it's come up on people's discovery or For You feed because I'm using tags appropriately and things like that. So all these things help people to find me, and so they come to me. But from time to time, I will reach out to an artist and say, would you like to come in and try a co-write and see how well we work together? Because I really enjoy what you're doing, and I think we could work well together. And there's been a handful of artists that have chosen to work with me, either from a writing or production perspective, or both.
Well, that totally resonates with me as well. I mean, I tend to find my clients by making content. It's the way that it is, and by making content with other people. I mean, the majority of my content is actually other people's content, and I think that's an important. You're almost probably the same. You're producing for other people. A lot of what you produce then is your content as well, if you like, or it's your calling card to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do shout about my clients and my artists, and I champion them a lot during the record making process, but afterwards as well. And everyone benefits at the end.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming and talking today. Folks, please do go and check out Rookes' music. We will be adding a song from Rookes onto the My Music podcast. There's already songs on there that she has helped produce, because we've had people like Lady Larkin, and that's already on there. Until next time, thanks for watching.